The meeting took place on a Tuesday morning in late September. I remember clearly because the maple trees outside had just begun to turn, and I was admiring how stunning they looked when Garrett Vance leaned over the scratched plastic table and said something that would unravel everything I'd worked to build. "Piper, I need you to revise the numbers in the Brookfield site report." I glanced up from my laptop, where I'd been rereading the soil data, silently hoping, despite knowing better, that the lead levels would have somehow decreased on their own. They hadn't. If anything, the retests had only confirmed what I already knew: the land was a chemical minefield waiting to hurt people. Revise them how? I asked, though part of me already anticipated the direction this was going. Garrett glanced around our makeshift field office, a rented trailer near the construction site, to make sure we were alone. His fingers tapped anxiously against the table, something I'd seen him do often during the 6 months we'd been working on environmental reviews for his real estate projects. "The city council votes Thursday to greenlight the elementary school build," he said. "We need the contamination readings to fall within acceptable parameters." I stared at him, stunned. "Garrett, the soil has 3 times the allowed lead levels. And that's not all, there's cadmium, arsenic. This used to be a battery manufacturing site. You're aware of this?" "I've read the report," he said, his tone sharpening. "I'm also aware that we've got $47 million in investor funding committed. The city already approved the building plans. Construction is scheduled to begin in less than a month." My throat tightened. "You're asking me to manipulate environmental data." "I'm asking you to explore possibilities," he replied smoothly. "Maybe the samples were mishandled. Maybe there were lab anomalies. Maybe we test from other areas." I sampled 12 separate zones across the entire site. I used 3 independent labs. The data is consistent. I could hear the edge in my voice, rising in pitch and volume. "This isn't ambiguous, Garrett. This is crystal clear. You want to build a school where children will play in toxic dirt and breathe contaminated air." He leaned back, studying me with the same cool blue eyes that once seemed dependable. "You're 31. Your firm's doing well, but still new. You've built a reputation in this space. Don't throw it away over something that can be interpreted in multiple ways. Interpretation doesn't matter when it comes to poisoning kids." Garrett stood and walked toward the small window, looking out over the Brookfield property, 200 acres destined to become Willowbrook Elementary if I signed off on his deception. "I want to be very clear," he said, still facing the glass. "I've been in this industry for 15 years. I know every player, every consultant, every agency contact, every engineer who matters. If you're unwilling to be flexible, I can make it very difficult for you to get work in this field again." The words hung in the air, thick and dangerous. "You're threatening to blacklist me," I said. "I'm laying out your options," he replied, finally turning. "In this business, people hire consultants who solve problems, not those who get stuck on ideals. You start getting a reputation as someone who blocks progress, and soon you'll have a lot of time to reflect on what went wrong." I thought about my student loans, my mortgage, and the other projects that might vanish with a single phone call from Garrett. But I also thought about something far more important. My name is Piper DeLoqua. And before I tell you what I did next, please pause for a moment and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I want to know how far my story travels, how many people still believe in integrity. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because this story only gets deeper and more tangled. What Garrett didn't know, what nobody knew, was that for the past 3 years, I had been quietly funding a merit-based scholarship at Central State University. Every semester, $5,000 went to an environmental science student chosen blindly based on their essays about sustainability, corporate ethics, and justice. The latest recipient? A student I had never met, but one whose essays had once moved me to tears. Her name was Madison Vance. Garrett's daughter. I discovered it purely by accident, at a fundraising dinner nearly a year ago. Madison was presenting research on pollution in underserved communities. When she mentioned her last name during the Q&A, something clicked. Later that night, I did some discreet digging. It confirmed what I suspected. This fierce, eloquent young advocate for environmental integrity was the daughter of a man who routinely bent rules to protect his bottom line. She adored him. Wrote about him constantly in her applications. How he inspired her. How he taught her that development should serve, not harm, communities. She had no idea that the anonymous donor behind her scholarship was the same person sitting in field trailers with her father, being pressured to falsify reports. And in that moment, facing Garrett's ultimatum, I made a decision that would shift everything. "I won't alter the report," I said, voice steady. He didn't react at first. But I saw his body stiffen slightly. "Then we've got a problem." "No," I replied. "You do. My report will reflect the actual data. That land is unsafe. It'll take millions in remediation and a 2-year delay to make it viable." "Then you're done," he said flatly. I closed my laptop and gathered my things. But at the door, I turned back. "One last thing. That scholarship your daughter receives at Central State? I think it's time she learned who's been funding it." For the first time during our conversation, he looked genuinely confused. "What scholarship?" I smiled. "Exactly." I stepped out into the crisp September air that smelled like fall, not deception, and walked away. The fallout came fast. Within 2 weeks, I'd lost 3 contracts. Long-standing partners ghosted me. When I applied for new gigs, I was told the roles had been filled, even as the listings stayed posted online. By November, I was working part-time at a local cafe, just to scrape by. I spent evenings Googling bankruptcy attorneys, wondering if I'd made the worst decision of my life. That's when I decided it was time to speak with Madison. I found her studying in the university library. She was curled up with a stack of textbooks on environmental policy. Smaller than I'd imagined, with her dad's pale blue eyes and a ponytail half falling out. Her laptop was plastered with stickers supporting green energy and eco-activism. "Madison Vance?" I asked, approaching carefully. She looked up. "Yes? I'm Piper DeLoqua. I'm an environmental consultant. And I need to talk to you about your scholarship." Her eyes lit up with recognition. "Are you with the committee? I've been wanting to thank whoever's behind it. It's changed everything for me." I sat down, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not with the committee. I'm the donor. I've been supporting your education anonymously for 3 years." Her face ran through a wave of reactions: surprise, gratitude, confusion. "You? But, why?" "Because your writing was some of the most thoughtful and passionate I've ever read. Because you understand that science is about people, about protecting those who can't protect themselves." She was quiet for a long moment, then smiled softly. "This means so much. My family, my father, he always says how proud he is that someone believed in me." That was the moment I'd been preparing for. "Madison, I have to tell you something else. It's about your father." Her smile dimmed. "What about him?" I pulled out a folder, copies of my real Brookfield report. "Your father hired me to assess a site for a future elementary school. The land is contaminated, dangerously. When I refused to hide that, he retaliated. Had me blacklisted." She flipped through the pages, her expression going pale. "This can't be true. He'd never." "I thought so too. But I wanted you to know. Not to hurt you, but because you deserve to know what's happening in your name." She clutched the report, her hands slightly shaking. "If these numbers are right, kids could suffer cognitive issues, health problems. That's why I spoke up. That's why I'm here. She closed the folder slowly, eyes clouded with emotion. What do you want me to do with this? She whispered. Nothing, I said as I stood to leave. This was never about what I wanted. It's about what you'll be able to live with. That conversation happened on a Thursday. By the following Tuesday, things began falling apart for Garrett Vance in ways I never could have foreseen. Madison didn't confront her father right away. What she did instead was far more devastating. She began to ask questions. That weekend, over dinner, she casually brought up a news story she'd seen about a lead contamination scandal at a school in Ohio. That could never happen on one of your sites, right? She asked. You always make sure the environmental reviews are airtight. Garrett, blissfully unaware of what had happened between us, launched into his familiar spiel about responsibility, transparency, and how his company always goes above and beyond in terms of environmental protection. Madison nodded, listening closely, mentally cataloging every bold claim. Then she got to work. As a senior environmental science student, she had access to more than Google. University archives, government records, expert professors in environmental law. Madison started digging through permits, inspection logs, and compliance records for every single project her father had overseen in the past 5 years. And what she uncovered shattered her trust in him completely. She found 3 developments where safety standards had been deliberately sidestepped. 2 projects had received permits through irregular, possibly illegal, backdoor channels. And 1, perhaps the most egregious, had filled in protected wetland without the proper clearances, resulting in floods that damaged over a dozen homes downstream. But Madison didn't blow up. She didn't throw accusations or start shouting matches. She simply went quiet, withdrawn, observant, and smarter than anyone in the house gave her credit for. She transformed her disappointment into a quiet, cutting intellect. At family dinners, she started making pointed remarks about corporate responsibility. She'd mention cases where companies sacrificed public health for profit, speaking in calm, moral tones that made the air in the room heavy. It's wild how some developers can justify cutting corners just to meet a deadline, she'd say, passing the salt. Like they think profit outweighs poisoning families. Garrett tried brushing it off. You'll understand when you've worked in the real world, he'd chuckle. Things are more complicated than they teach in school. But Madison just smiled, the kind of measured, knowing smile that unsettles you. Because she did understand. Far more than he realized. The next semester, she changed her major, from environmental science to environmental law. When Garrett asked why, she responded over coffee during winter break. Because it's not enough to study contamination, she said. Someone needs to make sure companies are held accountable when they choose profit over people. He laughed, uncomfortably. That's kind of a hostile take on business, sweetheart. Most firms are doing their best. She didn't argue. She just sipped her drink and let silence do the talking. Over the months, the emotional distance between them widened. She stopped asking for career advice. She no longer shared updates on her classes. When he brought up his work, she'd deflect or politely excuse herself. What made it crueler was that Garrett didn't know why it was happening. He couldn't see the connection between that Thursday meeting and his daughter's growing coldness. He tried everything to fix it. At work, he became obsessed with optics, overcompensating to appear ethically sound. He started commissioning unnecessary environmental audits. Hired third-party reviewers for projects that didn't need them. Even turned down a lucrative deal that would have required minor wetland clearance. But none of it mattered. Madison stayed cordial but emotionally unreachable. Eventually, the Brookfield project collapsed anyway. The city conducted its own environmental tests and uncovered the lead levels. Garrett's firm took a massive hit, both financially and reputationally. But the professional fallout was nothing compared to the personal devastation. Because losing your daughter's admiration, when that admiration used to be the thing you were most proud of, is something you never recover from. Years passed. Madison graduated law school and took a job at the state's Environmental Protection Agency, prosecuting violations of environmental law. She became fierce, relentless, thorough, immune to manipulation. Everything Garrett had once claimed to stand for, she now embodied, with a kind of grace he could never match. Garrett eventually retired early. He spent the last 10 years of his career trying to rebuild his public image, donating to conservation causes, funding scholarships, giving speeches about ethical development. But none of it brought Madison back. She showed up at family events, but kept her conversations neutral and detached, weather, current events, polite acknowledgments. What Garrett never truly grasped was that I hadn't ruined his reputation. I had done something much more surgical. I'd removed the foundation of love and respect from the one person whose opinion he valued most. And the beautiful irony? Madison had become exactly who she was meant to be. A fierce protector of the environment, a force for justice. The scholarship I quietly gave her helped build that. She wasn't doing it for me. She wasn't doing it for revenge. She was doing it because she understood, deep in her bones, that truth matters. But the story didn't end there. Because 6 months ago, something happened that shook everything all over again. I got a call. It was from an attorney at the State Environmental Protection Agency. "Miss Delacroix," he said, "we're pursuing a case involving widespread environmental fraud across multiple developments. Your name came up as someone with potential testimony." My heart skipped. "What's the charge?" "Falsification of environmental records, fraudulent permitting, and conspiracy to endanger public health. The lead prosecutor requested we reach out to you specifically." 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a courthouse waiting room, wearing the only professional outfit I hadn't sold or donated. My hands were clammy. Lawyers rustled papers around me. I never thought I'd be back in a courtroom, not like this. The scale of the case was enormous. Garrett's company wasn't the only one. They'd uncovered a web of developers, consultants, and even public officials working together to bypass environmental protections. Dozens of compromised sites. Millions in profits. Thousands of families exposed to toxins. But what I hadn't known, what I discovered when I walked into that courtroom, was who the lead prosecutor was. Madison Vance. She stood at the prosecution table in a dark navy suit, her expression unreadable, her posture unshakable. She was 31, the same age I had been when I sat in that trailer with her father. Her presence filled the room with quiet power. When our eyes met, there was a flicker, something between recognition and acknowledgement. Maybe even gratitude. I took my seat and watched her work. Madison was relentless. Every question, every document, every cross-examination, precise, deliberate, airtight. She didn't falter. She didn't play for sympathy. She was building a case stone by stone. And it was then I understood, my refusal to alter that report wasn't an isolated act. It had been part of a much larger story. The prosecution revealed a pattern, developers like Garrett manipulating consultants, bending rules, falsifying data for profit. Most of the others went along. But I hadn't. And because I had nothing left to lose, I'd kept everything, emails, lab results, project drafts. All of it. As the trial unfolded, Madison called witness after witness, consultants who admitted they'd felt pressured, executives trying to shift blame. Then came Garrett. He looked gaunt in his tailored gray suit, older than his years. The confident man from the trailer was gone, replaced by someone clinging to plausible deniability. Madison's cross-examination was brutal but calm. "Mr. Vance, regarding the Brookfield site, you hired Piper Delacroix to conduct environmental testing, correct?" "Yes." "And when her findings indicated dangerous contamination levels, how did you respond?" His lawyer objected. The judge allowed it. I asked her to double-check her results. Double-check or revise? I wanted accuracy. Madison pulled a folder from her stack. This is marked as Exhibit 47, she said. It's an email your assistant sent to 3 firms 2 days after Ms. DeLoqua submitted her findings. Please read the subject line. Garrett's voice wavered. Urgent, need environmental consultant willing to meet aggressive timelines. And the body of the email? I don't recall. Let me help. Previous consultant was inflexible regarding contamination standards. Seeking firm that understands real-world development realities. Care to explain what that means? Silence. Even his lawyer looked cornered. I meant that she wasn't considering the full context of the project. You mean the $47 million in investor money? Madison asked, voice like ice. Objection. Sustained. But the damage was done. Everyone in the room had heard it. Garrett hadn't just pressured me. He'd actively sought others who'd fake numbers to get the job done. 3 days of testimony later, the judge called a break before closing statements. That's when Madison approached me. Ms. DeLoqua, could we talk for a moment? We stepped into a quiet conference room. It was the first time we'd been alone in 6 years. I never properly thanked you, she said, softly. For what? For standing your ground. For being honest with me. For choosing integrity, even when it cost you everything. I looked at this poised, powerful woman, the one I'd seen so much promise in years ago. You didn't need me to become this. It was already inside you. She paused. You know what the hardest part was? It wasn't losing faith in him. It was realizing everything I admired was built on lies. I never meant to come between you two. You didn't, she said, her voice calm. He did. She looked me in the eye and said firmly, you exposed the truth. That matters. That afternoon, Madison delivered her closing argument with a force that can only come from someone who has known deep betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Environmental fraud is not a victimless crime, she told the jury. When developers manipulate contamination reports, when consultants fudge numbers to meet a financial goal, when regulators look the other way, they're not just cutting corners. They're stealing something sacred, the public's right to make informed decisions about their children's health and future. She pointed to the evidence table, overflowing with forged documents and fraudulent permits. They want you to think this is just business as usual. But what they're really asking is that you accept a world where profit comes before playgrounds, and construction timelines matter more than 6-year-olds' ability to learn without toxic exposure. The jury needed less than 4 hours. Guilty, on every count. But the moment that will stay with me forever came just before the judge dismissed the court. Your Honor, Madison said, standing tall at the prosecution table, before we adjourn, the state would like to acknowledge someone whose integrity made this case possible. The judge gave a nod. Go ahead, counselor. 6 years ago, Madison said, environmental consultant Piper DeLoqua was pressured to falsify contamination data that could have endangered hundreds of children with lead poisoning. She refused. Even knowing it would destroy her career, she chose public safety over personal security. That decision preserved the very evidence we relied on today. Then she turned and looked straight at me. Miss DeLoqua, would you please stand? It felt surreal as I rose from my seat. Every eye in the courtroom turned to me, jurors, attorneys, reporters, even the families of the convicted. Your Honor, Madison continued, I want the record to reflect that justice wasn't only served today through verdicts, but through the bravery of someone who stood for what's right, even when it cost her everything. The judge nodded solemnly. The record will so reflect. Miss DeLoqua, this court commends your unwavering commitment to ethical responsibility under great pressure. As I sat down, I glanced at Garrett, seated at the defense table. For the first time since that meeting in the trailer all those years ago, he looked like he truly understood what he had lost when he tried to force me to compromise. 2 months later, after the sentencing, Garrett got 3 years in federal prison and fines that would erase most of his wealth. I saw Madison outside the courthouse. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better than I thought I would," she said. "It's strange, but prosecuting this case felt like honoring the ideals I thought my father believed in. Even if I had to prosecute him to do it." I nodded. I understood. Somehow, Garrett had raised her to be exactly the kind of person who would one day hold him accountable. "What's next for you?" she asked. I smiled. The trial had brought in a wave of new consulting offers, companies wanting to work with the consultant who'd rather be blacklisted than lie on safety reports. "I think I'm going to be just fine." "Good," she said. "The world needs more people who choose integrity over convenience." As she walked away, I thought back to the scholarship money I'd once put toward her education. It had turned out to be the best investment I ever made, not just financially, but ethically. Because that money helped shape a prosecutor who just took down a network of environmental criminals, and safeguarded thousands of families from harm. But the real revenge wasn't the prison sentence. It wasn't even destroying Garrett's relationship with his daughter. The real revenge was that Madison had become living proof that environmental responsibility and corporate accountability mattered more than family loyalty. Every case she brought, every company she held accountable, every corrupt act she exposed, those were monuments to the values her father had once pretended to stand for. And somewhere in a federal prison, Garrett Vance now had a lifetime to think about the choices that cost him everything: his freedom, his reputation, his company, and the love and respect of the daughter who once believed he was a hero. The irony? In trying to ruin me for refusing to poison children, he had created the exact circumstances that led to his own downfall, by the one person he loved most. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about what you do to someone. It's about what you help them become. If you've stayed with me through this story, I'm going to ask you for a favor. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit that notification bell. Not for me, but because stories like this need to be heard. Right now, somewhere, someone is facing the same choice I did in that trailer 6 years ago, a choice between doing what's right, or what's profitable. And they need to know that standing by your principles isn't weakness. Sometimes, it becomes the very weapon that brings down the people who tried to destroy you for having them. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.